Hello, my name is Kalkidan Zodu, and I will be presenting to you the effects of pesticides on prenatal and postnatal health. I am sure we're all very familiar with pesticides as we see them being used everywhere around us. Pesticides are toxic chemicals formulated with the intention to kill pests and other unwanted organisms. They have a variety of applications in agricultural as well as residential areas. Residential pesticides are mainly used to control cockroach, destroy weeds, preserve wood, as well as preventing diseases from insects and rodents. Agricultural pesticides such as insecticides, fungicides, and plant control, growth control hormones are used to increase productivity in the agricultural setting. Although pesticides are very useful chemicals, science has shown that high level of exposure has negative effects on many organisms, such as humans and other animals. This is mainly because pesticides are not designed to specifically attack certain organisms. Their mode of attack extends to humans and other harmless organisms as well. Therefore, increased exposure leads to unintended health consequences as they are toxic substances. Occupational exposure is one of the ways people come in contact with pesticides more frequently. For example, farmers working in agriculture and nurses working in hospitals are exposed to pesticides more often than other people. Organophosphate is one of the most common types of pesticides found in the human body. Negative effects arising from such substances are especially apparent in pregnant women and their unborn child. It disrupts the regulatory systems in the unborn child's body, which leads to the development of health disorders. As I have mentioned previously, there have been numerous research and studies done by scientists regarding pesticides and their effects on human beings. They affect the growth and neurodevelopment of organisms, and in pregnant women, it poses complications with their unborn child, such as disrupting the balance of the endocrine system, which manages the hormones of the body. Next few slides, I will elaborate on how these issues come about by using studies done by scientists. The first research I will be discussing was done on pregnant women at the University of California, Berkeley. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, created a guideline to assess the risk of pesticide exposure. EPA also set a standard exposure limit to pesticides. The researchers at University of California, Berkeley used this guideline as a basis and conducted their study. Out of the pregnant women that they tested, 15% of them exceeded the healthy exposure limit of organophosphate pesticide. Because this is one of the most commonly used pesticides in both agricultural and residential settings, it is very difficult to completely avoid exposure. Another study was done on a cohort of minority women from African American and Dominican ancestry in their third trimester of pregnancy. All of these women have had recent exposure to pesticides. The results obtained from these tests have shown that all of the participants had 3 different pesticides present in their bodies. Of those women, about 30% had 8 detectable pesticides. Additionally, the exposure seemed to be higher in the African American women than the Dominican women. And according to the guideline developed by EPA, the level of exposure in some of these women has surpassed the health-based levels. To illustrate the effects of pesticides on pregnancy, another research was done that consisted of women working in small-scale agriculture that had higher and lower levels of pesticide exposure. This research serves to determine the effect of pesticide exposure and compare it to a previous research that had the similar format. The data obtained through a questionnaire showed that women with higher exposure levels had a higher percentage of infant death. Additionally, both groups of women experienced a 6.7 proportion of miscarriages. But in the previous research done 8 years prior, the percentage obtained for spontaneous miscarriages was 0.6. This serves to show that the extended exposure to pesticides increases the risk of miscarriages. This research has also shed the light on how being exposed to pesticides in the first trimester of pregnancy is the predominant contributor to spontaneous miscarriages. One research suggests that children of women occupationally exposed to pesticides have experienced impaired reproductive development. When pesticides attack the body, they also disrupt several systems in the body, such as the endocrine system, which regulates hormones. Therefore, the chemical interacts with the hormones, which disrupts the balance. The consequences of these exposures are apparent when the women give birth to boys with smaller penises and testicles, as well as a lower serum concentration of testosterone. This exposure also can lead to a disorder called cryptorchidism in the male reproductive system. Agricultural pesticides are main contributors to offspring neural tube effects on pregnant women. The previous slides demonstrate how an increased pesticide exposure of pregnant women can have negative impacts on the health of the mother as well as the unborn child. There are several government and private organizations that recognize this problem and do studies on the health implication of pesticides on humans and other organisms. For example, there are new regulations drafted by the Food and Drug Administration or FDA that serve to decrease the exposure of people to pesticides. In 1996, the Food Quality Protection Act was passed in the U.S., which prompted the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, to create the risk assessment guideline I discussed in the previous slides. EPA has also taken regulatory action to phase out residential use of some pesticide. Minimizing pesticide use is also highly recommended for pregnant women, especially in their first trimester, as illustrated in the past few research I mentioned. Although complete avoidance is very difficult, eating organic food and conventionally grown produce that contains lower amounts of pesticides can help aid the problem.